I didn't say that one, but I'm thinking of that one right now, was cell phones. They needed places to sell the cell phones. They needed to get the towers so people could call each other. Maybe there's a couple other things that I can't think of right now. And so then you use those as the examples. There was a time in America where we didn't have cars. Well, yeah, I mean, you can't. There were no gas stations. There were no mechanics. And then Henry Ford invented the Model T. Can't argue with that. And then gas stations sprang up. Now, the thing is, the one thing that I didn't know, I don't think there was any government mandates, and I was probably pretty safe in saying that. But sometimes you got to be careful. You say, well, no, there was a government mandate back, that Woodrow Wilson said, blah, 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 blah. So you want to be careful that you don't get blindsided with that. But the thing is, so then you think, so you kind of like converted the conclusions that you're going to state in your later speeches into these kind of fact-based particulars that are kind of like a dot painting, that you kind of put the fact dots out there, and then they see, oh, you can do all this without government mandate. If the money's there, the private industry will do it. And people can connect the dots, draw the outlines themselves. So that's the way you want to start thinking this through. Rather than, and so what I think that people do, their error, when they come up for cross-examination, is they state the conclusions. Well, you don't need private industry to set up infrastructure if the money is there. If I'd asked Chloe that question, she would have spoken for 2 minutes on why that's not true. So you don't state the ultimate conclusion as the question, because she's not going to agree with it, and you're just giving her the floor to just restate and amplify her points. Okay, so maybe that's more than what you, but that's the way that you kind of structure this. Okay, what would you like to, how would you want to do this next?
Does anyone else have a 1AC? Here? Okay. Why don't you go and give yours? And then we're going to do a piranha pack where everyone gets in a line and cross-exes. So think of cross-ex questions, and just make sure you do them in the way that Mr. Lawrence is teaching us.
Andrew,
Yes.
do you want us all to go up there for 3 minutes, or just
No,
we'll
we'll probably do like, yeah, 1 string of questions, maybe at max like 5 questions each. Yeah.
And again, this is definitely a work in progress. I wrote the majority of this today. So, everybody ready? All right. On July 29, 2005, Congress passed the Energy Policy Act of 2005, which, quote, authorizes the United States Department of Energy to issue loan guarantees to eligible products that avoid, reduce, or sequester air pollutants or anthropogenic emissions of greenhouse gases. One of these projects is nuclear loan guarantees, which amount to a little bit more, over $20 billion. However, instead of protecting the environment, this has turned into a loophole that perpetrates ongoing subsidy program that bails out companies when they default on their loans. Today we have come to decide whether or not this program should or should not exist, whether reform is needed, which is why the affirmative team stands resolved that the United States federal government should significantly reform its environmental policy. First of all, we want to define our terms. Environmental policy will be defined as, quote, any course of action deliberately taken or not taken to manage human activities with a view to prevent, reduce, or mitigate harmful effects on nature and natural resources, and ensuring that man-made changes to the environment do not have harmful effects on humans. We'll define loan guarantee as an agreement by an individual, a unit of government, insurance firm, or other party to repay all or part of a loan, in this case 80%, made by a lender in the event that a borrower is unable to repay. It will define moral hazard as the lack of any incentive to guard against the risk when you are protected against it. The sources for our definitions are available upon request, and all other definitions shall be operational and defined. Now for our plan. Our first and only mandate will be that Congress shall pass a bill banning all nuclear loan guarantees. Agency and enforcement will be the federal government, and no funding will be necessary since our plan is purely legislative. Now for our first justification, justification A, nuclear loan guarantees are bad. Nuclear loan guarantees have a 50% fail rate, and it's growing. Let's see what taxpayers for common sense have to say. This was published by PR Newswire on August 5th in 2009, just a little 10 days ago. Quote, the Department of Energy's loan guarantee program already has $18.5 billion authorized for Treasury-backed loan guarantees for nuclear reactors. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office estimates a 50% default rate on these loan guarantees. However, this could just be the beginning of billions more at risk in the nuclear industry, as have more than $120 billion has already been submitted in loan guarantee requests, unquote. It's your decision. Should or should not these banks have a responsibility to invest their money wisely? Now, our second point under this is that nuclear loan guarantees cause moral hazard. This piece of evidence comes from Veronique de Rugy, a PhD and senior research fellow at the Maracas Center at George Mason University. And they said for their article, Dissatisfaction Guarantee, published by Reason Foundation in March 2009. Quote, federally backed loans create a classic moral hazard. Because the loan amount is guaranteed, banks have less incentive to evaluate applicants thoroughly or apply proper oversight. Not only are the borrowers high risk to begin with, but it's not necessarily cost effective for lenders to identify the best of these bad applicants. These bad incentives are among the reasons for the financial crisis to begin with. For years, the government has encouraged banks to extend credit to non-credit-worthy borrowers and to make larger loans than a market would normally bear, even to credit-worthy borrowers. It did this by explicitly and implicitly guaranteeing certain banks' losses, unquote. Like it or not, this is sounding more and more like another Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac situation. Now, a third point under this is that nuclear loan guarantees are unconstitutional. This piece of evidence comes from Dean Stansel, a fiscal policy analyst at the Cato Institute, PhD. And he says for the Cato Handbook published for the 105th Congress, quote, corporate welfare is unconstitutional. Corporate subsidy programs lie outside of Congress's unlimited spending authority under the Constitution. Nowhere under the Constitution is the authority to spend taxpayer dollars to subsidize the computer industry or to enter into joint ventures with automobile companies, or to guarantee loans to favored business owners, unquote. Every policy needs to find a home in the Constitution, and if it can't, it shouldn't exist. Now, our second justification today, justification B, is that nuclear power is economically unviable at this time. Our first point under this is that nuclear power's costs is just too high. This piece of evidence comes from Craig A. Severance, a PhD and co-author of the Economics of Nuclear and Cold Power, published in the 70s. And he said on January 2nd, 2009, quote, it has been an entire generation since nuclear power was seriously considered for an energy option in the U.S. It seems to have been forgotten that the reason United States utilities stopped ordering nuclear power plants was their conclusion that nuclear power's business risks and costs proved excessive. Estimates for new nuclear power place these facilities among the costliest private projects ever undertaken. Utilities promoting new nuclear power assert that they are their least costly option. However, independent studies have concluded new nuclear power is not economically competitive. Given this discrepancy, nuclear's history of cost overruns, and the fact new generation designs have never been constructed anywhere, there is a major business risk nuclear power will be more costly than projected. Recent construction cost estimates imply capital costs per kilowatt hour, not counting operation of fuel costs, from 12 to 22 cents per kilowatt hour when the nuclear facilities come online. Another major business risk is nuclear's history of construction delays. Delays will run the costs even higher, risking funding shortfalls. The strain on cash flow is expected to degrade credit ratings. Generation costs per kilowatt